Welcome to Zibby's Bookshop. Thanks so much for stopping by. We're here to celebrate the launch of Take Two Birdie Maxwell by Allison Winn Scotch. Very exciting. We have lots of books to purchase tonight. We have a great conversation partner with Julie Clark. So it'll be about a 30-minute conversation followed by Q&A and then a book signing. So enjoy.
Awesome.
Yay.
Thank you all for coming. It's a Tuesday night, and I told everybody, like, it's a Tuesday night, you don't have to come, but I really am so appreciative of everybody who made the effort.
We're writing down everyone's names. Make sure to thank you appropriately.
I am very grateful.
All right, so I'm going to launch into the discussion of Take Two Birdie Maxwell, which I read last week and loved. It was so much fun. It was so just like exactly what we need in the world right now, which is just light and fun and joyful. And so tell us a little bit about the book.
So Birdie Maxwell is America's sweetheart, although she's Birdie Robinson to the public, and she is canceled to no fault of her own, really. And she retreats home to her small town in California under a veil of shame, where she finds an anonymous love letter, and she decides to create her own rom-com to win back America's hearts, and sets out in an RV to find out who wrote her the love letter. So,
it's really clever. It's really fun. I have some questions for you. So
that was also a good book.
All right. My friends.
Yes, it was.
I know. I think we talked about that one.
Yes, I hope we don't solve a murder.
So my first question is, early on, Birdie is struggling with her publicist who constantly uses the word pivot, pivot. And all of a sudden her publicist starts using the word remaneuver.
Yeah.
Now, I feel like that might be a jab at the film and publishing industry. Like they use
100% no.
They use really funny words that like and all sincerity. So it's the funniest word a film agent or a publicist has used with you at like remaneuver, right? And I'll answer it too.
I don't feel like, first of all, my film agents are here and I love them.
Yes, as do I. And I knew they were coming, which is why I wanted to start with the word remaneuver. Brittany, have you ever used the word remaneuver?
No.
Michelle, have you ever used the word
I
remaneuver?
haven't, but people use really crazy
They
vocabulary.
really do, right?
That is
They
true.
really
That
do.
is true.
Okay, so what's the craziest word?
So you nailed it.
Thank you. I mean, I do feel like, so I will just say, this is not a cop-out of this question, but I like agents and publicists who are honest with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't feel like I get sort of a lot of the BS that maybe other
No.
publicists would give them.
True.
Because I'm like, just tell
Give
me
it
the
to me.
truth and then I
Yes.
can actually be fine
Yes.
with whatever. So I don't know that I have a specific word. Do you have a specific word?
One person once said that someone was really vibing with the project, which I thought was hysterical, and it was not you.
Yeah.
And it was completely like said in earnest, and I was like,
Okay.
really
Well,
vibing with the project.
maybe they really
Yeah.
were like, vibing with the project. I don't know what that. I don't know.
All right, so this is a slow burn book, and the two main characters, Birdie and Elliot, thank you, are childhood friends, right? And we know from the outset that Birdie has been in love with Elliot for quite some time.
Correct.
And so the way that you write this book, you wrote it from both of their POVs. And I don't think I'm ruining anything by saying that Elliot also has like major feelings for Birdie, but neither of them know it. Right. So my question really was, why did you choose to write it that way as opposed to keeping your readers guessing about the two main characters' feelings? We know right away they're super into each other and they just don't know that the other person is into them, which is a really like interesting slow burn, like, you know, you're like frustrated and you're like, oh God, this is the chapter where it's going to happen, and it doesn't. And it, you know, like, why did you choose to write it that way instead of like keeping us wondering about what that other character's thinking?
So this book went through many, many drafts. And initially Elliot's point of view was not in it.
Okay.
And it just felt like it was missing something. Like when you're telling, a rom-com, I think that having not just, if you're just hypothetically not just the female perspective, makes it much more interesting. I just felt like he was a character who I felt like people could root for, and I didn't just want to portray this woman who was in love, sort of this unrequited love.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't particularly interesting to me, but these sort of messy characters who could play off of each other, I felt like maybe made her almost have more agency, because if not, she's just like some woman who is pining over a guy.
That's what I was gonna say.
I'm
It
not
gives her
interested
a
in
lot
that.
more power, which I love.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Because she's not, like you said, like woman who's just pining for the guy
Yeah.
who she's maybe never gonna get, but in a rom-com,
Right. That's not
Chances
interesting to me.
it's not.
So
Yeah.
I also really like writing male characters,
Mhm.
particularly sort of modern but complicated male characters. I try to make them good guys, but who are also flawed in the
Mhm.
same way that I like writing women who are, good humans, but also flawed. So I think there's a lot of room for that in the rom-com genre. And a lot of rom-com readers like reading about flawed but good men.
Yes,
So,
I think so.
to the audience, I think that's helpful
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah. No, I loved Elliot and I loved their relationship, and there's definitely this palpable tension between them
Thank you.
that carries through all of the pages, where you're like, by the time you're just like dying for them to like, just talk.
You're
It's
talking about the sex
wonderful.
scene, aren't you?
No, I'm not, because we don't write sex scenes.
I did have to write a sex
I'm
scene.
sorry.
I'm sorry.
It was uncomfortable.
So far, no sex scenes. All right, so you said that you wrote many drafts of this book. So let's talk about some of the iterations of this
Sure.
book. You have them road tripping in an RV, which I absolutely was like my favorite part. I was like, oh yes, they are getting in the RV. Yes, they are getting in the RV. Was that always part of the story, or was it something you added later?
So I started there's some writers here. I started on page 1, 5 times, like throughout entire drafts. And initially she was like a really famous romance writer who didn't believe in love, but still got this letter, and it just wasn't working. And when it finally started working, she was initially named Toby, like they're just the whole thing. And then my grandmother had passed away, and her name was Birdie. And somebody in the comments when I posted something said like, that would make like a great character name. And it stuck with me. And when I rewrote her as Birdie, just like she flew off the page. Like she was like, okay, you can see like how she's this, sort of dynamic woman. And that's when I set her at home, and I added in Mona, who is the twin sisters, Elliot's twin sister, her RV. And that's when I was like, well, this is how they're going to get, like, you don't
Yeah,
need
you
them at
can't fly a
airports,
plane,
right?
yeah.
Like, that's not interesting.
No.
So that was when it came in, probably in like the 3rd or 4th draft.
Okay.
And then it was
Yeah.
really like the 5th draft when it started working.
Okay.
So if there
That's a lot.
are writers here who are aspiring, please know that if page 1 isn't working or draft 1, and you
Write
just
it again.
Yeah, you just keep going.
Write it again.
Yeah,
Okay, so let's talk about your grandma Birdie.
sure.
Tell us about her.
She passed away at 106.
Mm.
So we felt like it wasn't something that we could be like, I mean, we were sad,
Yeah.
but it was a real celebration.
Sure, yeah.
Because when we live that long, it's incredible. So I wrote a college thesis on my family, and I remember interviewing her, and she married my grandfather in like her 30s, and this was like in the 1940s or something.
Mhm.
And she said they dated for 9 years, and she's like, we finally just got married because everybody was sick of us like dating. And at the time, that was like a really modern thing. And she was an artist. And so while Birdie is not her at all, I just felt like her sort of spirit, and my other grandmother was like a total hellraiser. And so, and my daughter is named after her. So I just felt like the book is dedicated to them. It's just about sort of women who do their own thing. And
That's Birdie.
so that's my grandmother, both my grandmothers, me a little bit, my daughter a little bit, I think a lot of us here. So Yeah, so Birdie Dash, 106.
That's amazing.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've talked a lot in interviews about how this book was really hard to write. Why do you think some books are so hard? Why do some books fight so hard to be written, do you think?
Oh, I wish I knew the answer to
I know.
that.
That's
I
why
don't
I'm
know
asking
if you. So with this one, I will say it was book 2 of a contract, and I know there are other writers here, and I'd be curious to hear their feedback. I struggle with the pressure of knowing that I have to deliver something, and it is nothing. I love my publisher, I love my editor. It is just sort of in the weeds of the business end of it, where you have to produce something, and I, as a creative, have a very hard time with that. So I think I just felt like, okay, I know I have a year, I need to start writing, and I wasn't ready to write yet, and that can produce crap stuff. Yeah. So to my editor's great credit, she stuck with me and just kept saying, go back, gave me really positive ways to get back into the story while also completely rewriting it. And eventually on, I think, draft 5, it just started working when I sort of embraced, okay, this is who Birdie is. I didn't necessarily want to set it in Hollywood because I've done that before, but it was really what the story demanded. I don't like repeating myself in books, but it just wasn't working in the other ways. And sometimes you just have to let the book be what it's going to be.
And it needs the time to, I think, to become what it's going to be too.
Exactly.
You can't rush it.
Exactly.
Deadlines are just.
This is the first book that I've ever asked for an extension because it just wasn't ready. And when it's your name on the spine, you're very aware of wanting to give readers the best possible thing that you can deliver. And so I just think I felt that pressure.
Yeah.
And, I'm writing a new one now without that pressure. And it's just a totally different experience. And it's not that the book that's delivered to the readers is any different, hopefully, for their experience. But as a writer, it's a very different experience.
Yeah,
Correct.
It is very different.
Correct.
Yeah. I feel sorry for people with multiple book deals.
We were just talking about this because at a drink.
I
We were talking about that.
Because that's a lot of pressure. You have to, they're like, okay, when are you going to start a book 2? And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, I need a vacation.
Or just, I don't know, I've been sitting on an idea for like 6 to 8 weeks now. I guess I should get started. I wrote like 300 words.
Yeah.
That's
a good day. Yeah, between this and the one I'm working on now, I took like 4 months. I just did nothing.
Yeah.
I did nothing.
Yeah.
And finally I was like, God, I feel ready. Yeah.
So I want to talk about your secondary characters, and there are a lot of them, which means that you did your job very well, because not once was I like, wait, who?
Oh, thank you.
Which is really hard to do when you have that many people in a book and they don't all come at you at once as a reader, which also is really hard, where you're like, I don't know, there's like 20 people in this book and I don't know who anybody is. But your secondary characters, Andy, Mona, Ian, Carter, Simon, Nelson, Kai, they're so rich and real, and yet you don't bury us in backstory at all. So how do you do that? How do you give us the information that we need to know so that we feel like these people are real 3-dimensional people, and yet you don't go back to like the 3rd grade?
So that is a really good question, and I don't even know that I know the answer to that, other than I think from a craft perspective, you put them right in the middle of a scene, you give them very specific dialogue and very specific, like there's a scene at the beginning with Nelson where she is in a bar and he has sort of been shitty to her in high school, and he does something equally sort of what she perceived to be shitty. And she, just in what he's doing and her reaction to it, you immediately know what their dynamic is. And I think when I was younger, I would get bogged down in the backstory that would then have to be cut because it would be too expository. But hopefully as you get older, you can sort of, not older, as you get more experience, you can hone that craft. I'm reading a book now where I'm liking it a lot, and I'm not, but there is too much backstory. And you can know exactly who these people are in one scene. And so that is really the goal of tight writing. And I don't always do it well, and none of us always do all of this
not on the first try.
Correct. But I think you have to make these people specific, and they have to each have their own personality and their own idiosyncrasies. Like Mona has her RV and she runs a bar. you know who she is. Like, I don't need to tell you the rest
Right,
of it.
right.
Like, that's who,
Yeah.
who she is.
Yeah.
You know, Nelson pines for Mona and writes like screeds about Birdie on the internet, like when he shouldn't.
Mhm.
That tells you who he is. So Andy is not impressed with her sister's celebrity, and she's a PhD student. Like, you know who she is.
Mhm.
So I just think the specificity of
Those
it.
details.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really do. So you bring that Hollywood energy to life. Did you talk with industry insiders or did you just read a lot of People magazine?
I live in LA. Like, we can bring Hollywood to life.
I
So, no, I did not talk to insiders.
Who's
other
Birdie
than-
Maxwell like, do you think? If Birdie Maxwell could be,
So I
okay, let's cast her as a
Well, I envisioned her as sort of like the 1990s, early 2000s Julia Roberts.
So did I.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's who. I feel like now celebrity A-list is not sort of the same thing. I mean, I guess there's Selena Gomez. Like, I don't even know
I
who
don't
the
either.
younger.
I don't either. They
set
say like,
is.
who do you want? And I'm like, I don't know, Julia Roberts, Reese Witherspoon. They're like, no, these people are like 55. And I'm like, oh, they are.
That's what I'm
And then
saying.
they're throwing names out, and I'm like Googling them on the Zoom call, like,
Yeah,
who's this person?
I- that's
Never heard of them.
But I feel like she was like the last. I mean, Reese too, obviously.
Yeah,
But Julia had a very public, like, people wanted to take her down. And I feel like there was this moment where she was the biggest thing in the world,
yes.
and there were still people who were out to get her. And so that was sort of who I was envisioning when I was writing this, except now it's like social media, and it would be like if all the things that happened in the 90s were amplified. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So,
You already answered that. Okay, so here I like to do this at the very
I'm
end of my
nervous.
event. With Janelle Brown, I did a flash, like a lightning round.
okay.
But I'm not going to do a lightning round with you.
Okay.
I'm going to do a quiz with you.
Oh,
Are you ready?
yeah.
Okay.
Oh, God.
So this is your 10th book.
Yes.
Can you name them all?
I can.
Okay, go.
Oh, you want me to name
You
them
have
all?
to name them all.
Okay, The Department of Lost and Found, Time of My Life, The One That I Want, The Song Remains the Same, The Theory of Opposites.
That was my favorite one.
Oh,
That was the
thank
first one of
you.
yours that I read.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That
I wouldn't
was
say
a
it's my
very
favorite one,
good
but, like,
story.
That was the first one of yours that I read.
So
Okay,
that,
that's at
I'm
number
just
5
going
or
to tell you, for writers in the room, that was the book that nobody wanted to publish me anymore because they had paid me a lot for my 4th book and it didn't sell, to sort of variety of reasons that had nothing to do with me, I feel like. And I had to publish that independently.
Well, I will tell you that that was the book that I discovered you as an author, so that when you circled back to me with The Last Flight and was like, I love this book,
Yeah.
I was like,
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
yes.
Well, so lesson
Yes.
in authorship. Then
Okay, so you need to start over.
Okay, no.
Start over.
No,
I
I
got 6, okay.
opposites. In 20 years, between me and you, Cleo McDougal regrets nothing. Rewind
I
this.
loved that one. I
Thank you.
loved Cleo.
Thank
Cleo.
you. Yeah,
Cleo.
I loved Cleo too.
Cleo,
She holds a
rewind,
special
and then
place in
this
my
one.
heart. Rewind and then this one.
Excellent. All right.
Yeah.
My questions are done. If anybody wants to ask her to name all those books backwards, that might be
I
interesting.
can do that too.
That might be interesting.
Yeah.
So let's open up to questions. Yeah.
I remember at a last event that you were talking about the fact that publishers are demanding spice.
Yes.
So, and I know you were not thrilled about that. I would
Yes.
love to hear how you approached.
She did it very well.
So there's a
Okay.
sex scene in this book.
Yes.
Sorry to my daughter. And I mean, she won't read it, so it's fine. But I mean, you just have to look. Rom-com demands that. There's other rom-com. I see Suzanne nodding. Suzanne Park is also a rom-com writer. I mean,
Sex in your books? You put a lot of sex in your books?
No,
No.
I'm closed doors.
yeah, she's
Yeah.
she,
That's what
right.
I thought.
to it.
But
Yeah.
Yeah.
close that door.
Yeah. Very close.
You know, I feel like so many books in, I do just want to give readers what they're looking for. And there are writers who write way more. One scene, I was like, this is all I can do. But, you know, you are writing for the reader experience at this point in my career. Like, it's fine. And I felt like this book in particular is really just a straight across the board rom-com. It's not there for other reasons. It is just there to be a rom-com and to bring people joy and to hopefully, give them sort of an immersive experience where they don't have to think about the world. So I felt like if I'm asking that of readers, then I should give them what they want. So, I mean, I don't mean like give them what they want, but I so that was, I do think that's part of being a commercial writer. Like you have to be aware of what people are asking. So thanks for the question.
So your DMs are filled with
Where's the sex scenes, Allison?
What's interesting? So for the rewind, the early feedback was we love the book, but people wanted a sex scene in it. So we went back. I just said this to Julie after Galleys, and we put in like a very short sex scene because it was like it's what this type of readership wants, and that's fine. It's not what I usually do, but again, like I think particularly with this genre, and I mean there's some other genres as well, you just want to meet people, you want to give them what they want, so it's fine. I'm only a little traumatized.
We talked it through about for an hour and a half.
Exactly.
It was fine.
It's fine. Yeah.
It's a good sex scene.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's fine.
It didn't traumatize me.
Okay, good. I remember I emailed my agent. I was like, I wrote it. I'm so proud of myself. Yeah.
Any other questions? Everyone knows you someone.
I know. Yeah.
So 10 books.
Yeah.
That is so much creativity. There's so many characters that you're not, they're not developments. They're relationships that you're creating, developing, and then the nuances of all those, and then just exactly what you're talking about, the readership. For 10 books.
Yes.
How?
I often, my husband's here, I say after every book, I feel like I'm done. Like I don't have anything else to write about. And then like 4 months go by and I'm like, well, I'm bored. Like I have an idea. I don't know. Like I do feel like, so I turned 50 this year, and I do feel like, I don't know, do I need to do this forever? And I don't know the answer to that. But I have 2 more books due. So I will at least hit 12.
Do you want to talk about the next one or no?
Sure. So I'm working on one, we haven't announced it, but we'll called The Insomniacs. And it is about a group of people who can't sleep, who meet online and try to help solve each other's problems. So I'm really excited about it because mini concept.
Yeah,
You
exactly,
too?
right? Look at Michelle's eyes just went.
All over this. So at that one, I was struggling to come up with it, and I was up at like 3:00 in the morning. And I said, "Why am I not writing about this?" Because no women I know sleep. So, but it's something that I think about a lot, and I know a lot of writers right now are thinking about the publishing industry. It has really changed, and it's hard. And a lot of us, I think, are thinking, do we need to do this forever? Do we want to do this forever? And it is something I think that after every book, I reevaluate. And I don't, then my brain sort of gets back into gear and starts writing it. But I'm someone, I don't necessarily love the writing process of it. It's just, so I just feel like it's a career, and it's a really wonderful career to have, but it is still a lot of work. So that's.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't like writing process.
That teased out a question. Thank you for that. The creative process and judgment, self-judgment.
Mm-hmm.
So when you found an idea that you're at the time very excited about, do you immediately suspend any judgment and just go, or do you keep that judge while you're creating to hone the process? Or maybe it's both. I don't know.
That is a really good question. It is very difficult, particularly in your first drafts, not to judge what's coming out on the page. But I think if you were judging it every single word, every single paragraph, you're never going to get to the end of the draft. So, I mean, the mantra that a lot of writers just say is just get it down because words are better than an empty page, which is true. I have definitely, I would say prior to the past 2 books, written a book between each one that I've thrown out because it wasn't good. It's difficult to know if it's really going to be that bad until you're about like maybe 75, 100 pages in.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've spent, you know, I don't know, a couple months doing something that then you really need to have sort of like your come to Jesus moment where you're like, I don't know that this is what I want to spend the next 2 years of my life doing and promoting and asking people to buy. But I do think that you give yourself like 75 pages. So I don't know. I see other writers. I don't know if other writers feel that way, but that's usually where I come down. And I will say in the past, I might have stopped writing this book when the first 4 drafts weren't working, but I knew there was something in it that I was interested in exploring. So that was sort of the breadth of my experience that allowed me to do that. Where earlier in my career, I probably just would have quit. So, yeah.
It's for both authors. If you didn't have to listen to trends or the market or reviews or whatever, what would you want to write as like a fun project to do?
Oh, that's a great question. So I really do like writing second chance romance. Like I loved, particularly my last book was set in the 90s, which was like, I loved writing that. I like writing what could be called bitchy women because I love a bitchy woman. So if I didn't have to acknowledge that readers don't always love hard-edged women, I would probably write very acerbic women more than I have to dial them back like every draft. So I would probably just write snarkier characters and I don't know, that type of thing.
I don't know. That's a hard question.
Julie has a new book. I don't know if you can talk about it, but it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So, which was sort of a dream book of yours.
Yeah, that one is about it's about a ghostwriter who is the daughter of a famous horror author who is also the main suspect in the brutal murder of his older brother and younger sister in 1975. And she is a ghostwriter, and she's been called home to ghostwrite his last book, his memoir of what really happened in 1975. So after 50 years, he's finally ready to talk. So that's not coming out for a long time.
Yeah. That sounds so good.
Not until summer 2025. But like to answer your question, I mean, it's still, that one is like, you know, they have me in the thriller category, but and everybody who reads my book says like, it's not really a thriller, you know, because I'm not, you know, people aren't running down dark alleys. They're not, you know, shooting guns over their shoulders and, you know, there's no like police work happening. But I do feel like I love to write that drama of sort of pivotal moments in your life kind of thing. And so with my character Olivia, you know, the pivotal moment for her is her career is on the ropes. She's about to lose her house, and the only book that she can get under contract is the one that her father wants her to write for him, which is not at all what she wants to do. And so I love to put characters in situations like that. So, but I think I also wouldn't mind delving into a little bit of the speculative a little bit. I have an idea for that, and I can't even really articulate yet well, so I won't.
It'll percolate.
But yeah, that's the one that I have like 300 words on, and that's where we are. I have a half of an outline, so yeah.
Speaking of outlines, so with 22 characters, how do you keep them all straight? I mean, do you whiteboard them? I would have to. I wouldn't remember who I've already talked about where and how. And
I don't, but I will say, so I just start on page 1 and I go. But in every book I've ever written, I've gotten names wrong, like in the middle, and I'll be like, what? Who is Martin? Oh,
Right.
And so that just smooths itself out. In fact, the Insomniacs I'm working on now, I've already, like, somebody had 2 kids and later on they had 3 kids. Like, these are things that iron themselves out. And it would be much easier if I actually did outline and do that. But my process is like it's baked in, so I don't know if you outline.
I don't love to outline.
Yeah.
The one that I'm about to work on has a lot of time jumps. So I felt like I needed to sort of get a handle on at least, and I have like a little blue card on my desk that's like, she was born in this year.
Yeah, that's
In
smart.
1982,
Yeah.
she lived here. In 1995, she lived here because I'm going to be going around a lot. But for the ghostwriter, I didn't outline it necessarily, but I did after I wrote a draft. I usually like to write a draft first, and then I go back and I reverse outline it. So then I have all my chapters and like what happens in them and like the subplots, and I just kind of make sure I hit the different subplots so that, you know, you're not like, whatever happened to John? Like, yeah, so I like to do that. And then I have 2 calendars because this one is a dual POV and a dual timeline, which I said I'd never write again after the last flight, but apparently I could keep doing it.
Yeah.
But I have a 2024 calendar on this side of my wall and a 1975 calendar on this side of the wall, and I just plot out like, here's the day they went to the, you know, the concert, here's the day they went to, you know, whatever. And like, I have to do that because I just won't be consistent. And if you ask me to read it one more time, I could probably cry.
The worst.
So-
But I will say it goes through several rounds of copy edit. So
somebody will
they
copy
pay
it.
somebody to map out every single date, character.
And I'd still like to say that they don't catch everything, so
No.
please don't
Yeah,
email us
exactly.
because
There was supposed to be a comma. Yeah, there's a typo.
Right. I just got an email the other day from someone who felt that the use of the word plate glass in the beginning of the last flight was not necessary.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'm going to send that back to the editor. Like,
So you don't want those emails?
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, that one's a good one.
Oh, I was just, you mentioned that your process is sort of baked in, and I'd love to hear more about what your process is. But also going back to what you said about sometimes you have a book, you're 75 to 100 pages in, and you just put it in the drawer going, I know it's not good. How do you know that? I mean, is that just your own assessment, sort of in the vein of like,
It's my own assessment, but also the thought of like, so most of my books, let's say, are 350 pages, of writing like another 250 pages in this world is just not interesting to me. Like I do think that readers can sense if maybe you're not interested in it enough. And like, I don't know, maybe they're not saying something new. Maybe they're just like, their circumstances are not complicated enough. And I don't have like the mental energy, like I don't care enough to go back and make their lives complicated. I do think it's really hard, as I said, like in a different part of my career, I probably would have quit this, and I'm really glad I didn't. But I don't know if you have like a gut check. It's just one of those things where you're like, I'm bored with this already, and I still have like 4 or 5 more months on this. Like that just sounds awful. So that's where.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you read through it and you're like, God, I'm so bored.
Yeah.
Then you're like, well, if I'm bored,
right, exactly.
Then everyone else is going to be bored
I do think it's a lot of authors recognize. I mean, it's a privilege to ask people to read 300 pages of your work, and it's one of the reasons that we get sort of neurotic when a book comes out, because we know it's a lot of people's time and it is a big ask. So if it's not jumping out to me, like I just can't expect it to jump out to someone else. And then just to answer your question about my process, I really just start on page 1 with like usually a really interesting protagonist to me and a complication. So here we had this actress who had been canceled and who found an anonymous love letter. And then I just write and I try to.
Did you go back and forth between Birdie and Elliot just straight through, or did you write Birdie straight through and then plug Elliot in? Well, you did because he came later.
He came later, but I plugged him in, and then my editor said, I actually think it's more interesting if he doesn't show up till chapter 7. So it was really just Birdie's perspective for like, I think
He didn't show up till chapter 7?
I mean, he's in there, but his POV is not.
Okay, yeah, okay.
So,
yeah.
which I had not really seen before, and I was nervous, and I was like, well, it's a book, you can do
I didn't
anything
even
you
know
want.
this.
Yeah. So, who's to say you can't do anything?
Yeah, didn't bother me.
So anyway, that's just my process. So, but if I were writing a different genre, like a thriller or I had to know the ending, I would have to outline. But I never know my ending. So
Oh, I always know my
no, I never know my ending. In fact, who I thought wrote her this letter totally changed.
I'm
By-
just popular. I want to know. who
by
the
the
original
end.
thought.
So yeah, just so.
Can you text it to me?
I can just tell you when people are not
Yeah.
listening.
No, I mean, like right now. Text it.
Yeah.
I'm curious just about that comment you made of how much your characters impact your life when your real life, when you're writing and you're in that writing process for both of you.
Well, my family knows, like when I'm really writing, I'm like, I will literally say to them, stop talking to me. I'm working. Like, why are you, this can be handled without my presence. So I tend to be pretty insular and I just need to like focus. That said, I can write under most circumstances, like there can be chaos in my house, noise, whatever, it doesn't matter. But I do, it's almost like that fugue state when you're driving sometimes and you don't know how you've gotten there.
Yeah.
I take a lot of walks, I exercise, and I just think about them, and so that I can just sit down, write, hit my word count for the day, and be done. So it affects me a lot. Like my sleep, I'll wake up and I'll take notes on my phone, and then I'll try to go back to sleep. But it's sort of all encompassing, which is probably why I feel like I need that time off, because it's like you have to reset your brain in a way to just relax.
Yeah.
I don't know how you.
Yeah, I mean, I write early in the morning, so my
Yeah.
kids aren't awake.
Julie's also a teacher, so she.
And so
goes
I
into a
like
job.
to get that done first, like exercise, except it's easier because you don't have to get out of bed. And then, yeah, you get into a fugue state. That's a really good way to put
Yeah.
it. It's almost like a trance
Yeah.
where you don't realize how much time has passed. I guess athletes call it like the zone, but
Yeah.
like you do just sort of forget where you are for a little while. And it's like when you're reading too. It's the same experience when you're reading, except like you're sort of making it up as you go. And then that's the hardest part though. Like the revision part for me is fun. I
don't mind
like
revision either. Me
revision
too.
better than drafting, because drafting half the time you're like, well, this is not gonna make it. But I gotta write it, because otherwise I'm not gonna be able to get to this point over here, which is where I really need to get to, and I'll have to rewrite this later. And sometimes I will put in brackets like put something funny here, or
Yeah.
put something interesting here.
TK.
And then and then you just have to keep going, because otherwise you lose your momentum. And then once writing, momentum is critical. And I think that, like when you send your draft off to someone and they don't get back to you for 6 months, that's really hard, because you've lost a lot of momentum. And it really is something that once you start doing it, like I've lost momentum right now. I wrote 300 words and I was like, that like when you get that momentum, you really do have to like get up and get your 1,200 words or however many it is every day. Otherwise you sort of don't come back to it.
Yeah.
100%. Especially that first draft when you're really like, I don't know who these people are and I don't know why anybody would care about them.
Right. And that's important to get back to your process, to the first question, Karen. When I'm writing, I try to write every day.
Yeah.
I will give myself maybe like one day off on the weekend or whatever it is. But it's just like, it's like exercise. You just dread it if it's not in your everyday like cycle. And so, I try to do 1,000 words a day.
Yeah. And I think that you can do even less than that and
Oh,
still
yeah, absolutely.
have a full draft of a book in a few months.
Yeah.
You do it every day.
Absolutely.
I was just thinking of a question. I know like in today, I'm also a writer, but in today's kind of, when you're aspiring writer, everyone really says you have to have developmental editor, you have to have developmental editor. And I don't know if that's just on current today's world thing. Like when you guys started writing your books, did you do that? Have you ever used developmental editors? Do you have any opinion on that?
Do you mean pre-sending it like to an agent?
Yeah, or even like, I know a lot of writers now that like before they send it to their editor or their agent would want them to do it, or.
So I think if you're under contract already, that's your editor's job. Or like my agent reads all my stuff. She's watching. Hi. She reads all my stuff and gives me notes before I submit it. But I think if you are unagented and you're sending out to an agent, it's always beneficial. I don't know that you have to pay someone, but to have objective readers who will tell you the truth about what isn't working. Again, 10 books in, I still get a ton of notes, and every book is like a new creation. So you sort of start over. So to have somebody there who can say, this is what's not working and this is what's working is, I think, really important. And I always say, like, if people ask me what the most important advice is for aspiring writer or even a veteran writer, is to just like remove your ego from it. Like you cannot have an ego with this job, or you can, but your work is not going to be nearly as good. And so I just think you need to be open to constructive criticism. So it could be a writing partner who you have, or maybe you pay somebody. But I do think it's helpful, but not.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with a developmental editor, and sometimes, especially if you're not under contract, you really do want to, but people can do that for you too. My advice would be not to spend a lot of money on a developmental editor, but more to find people who write in your genre, who read heavily in your genre, even if they're not, writers themselves, if they're readers, that's really important. Like my last reader is always my publicist Gretchen's neighbor, Annie. Thanks, Annie. Annie just read The Ghostwriter last week or the week before because I wanted to make sure. And like Annie's my person, and she reads it and makes sure that and she's just a regular person. But I have other author friends who read things, and they're the ones that give me the best notes. I have worked with the developmental editor. I love her. She's phenomenal. And when I feel like I want to save some time, like with Lies I Tell, I was under contract with that one. And there were things that I needed to work out before I sent it to my editor. And so I worked with her on those because it saves a lot of time. I would get there eventually on my own, but sometimes a developmental editor will get you there faster.
Yeah.
So it just depends.
And it can just be trusted readers.
And they're very expensive. So I would caution an aspiring writer to invest that money when you don't even have a guarantee of a book sale yet.
And here's one example related to this. Laura Dave, who was here, but I think had to leave, is always my first reader. And she read it and she told me my ending wasn't working, which it wasn't. And she didn't tell me how to do it, she told me why. And the ending is so much better now. And without that, I would have thought it was perfectly fine. But I fully credit her on saying, no, I'm not going to spoil the book, but she explained to me why it wasn't working. And I hadn't seen that, but she did. And so it, it changed the book.
And I have like 5 or 6 writer friends who I send my stuff to, and they read it and give me notes. And it's just part of that process. And a lot of times they'll tell you something and you're like, what do you mean? Are you kidding me? And then all of a sudden, if you just stop and sit with it for a minute, you're like, I bet I could make that work.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Susie actually inspired this question. I was thinking about this. So my husband and I, we don't read the same books, right? So we don't necessarily talk about the characters, but let's say we're watching a TV show together, just sitting with me. So in the house, I'll say, like, what do you think Leo's doing now? Like, we'll just have this. How long do your characters, I know it's 10, stay with you kind of in that way? Because you're talking about your process, you're thinking about them all the time. And then once the book's done and you move on, and I know you said there's a break and a vacation, like, how's that for you?
It can be difficult. It's book by book for me. So with my last book, with The Rewind, it took me a long time to get these characters out of my head. I think it really varies. And it's part of the reason I wasn't necessarily ready to dive into this. You form this like relationship with them, and some of them stick with you longer, like any relationship, and some of them you're like, okay, that came to its natural conclusion. So goodbye. But I think it really is specific about about which,
Yeah.
which book it is, sort of book by book.
Yeah, I think in specific characters with books will stick with you longer than other characters
Yeah.
from that same book.
Mhm.
So I'm definitely, I think more about Meg than I think about Kat from The Lies I Tell. For obvious reasons, she's just more interesting.
Yeah.
I do think a lot about Eva and Claire still.
Yeah.
From The Last Flight. So yeah, I do.
Yeah. They become like it's like you have a real relationship.
They're like
it
kids you
sounds so
sent
weird
off to
say.
college, and you're like,
So weird to say that. I
Yeah,
feel like
I know it's very precious.
Yeah,
isn't it?
exactly.
I know.
So awful.
They're not real.
I know, they're not real. We created them.
Right,
We're like God.
right.
And
Really, truly,
I know.
we're artists.
Exactly. Anyone else?
Well, just sort of speaking to that idea of like, you write fiction, but do you ever struggle with feelings of exposure when you're writing fiction? Like, people are gonna look at these characters and think, this is me, or this story is mine, and
Sure.
has that happened for you, and how do you deal with that?
Sure. Well, you write thrillers. I don't think
I'm
people think
all
that-
of my characters all at the same time. I am Kat, I am Meg, I am Claire, I'm Eva, minus the drugs. But yeah, I'm Paige without the geneticists.
I think because I write sort of a lot about like relationships, people definitely think that I'm working stuff out. And I think that's just something that you have to get comfortable with, people making assumptions about you. Like I had a book early on in my career that did very well about like a woman who wanted to go back and relive a different relationship. And my husband, to his credit, always joked like, "Oh, that's Allison's like autobiography." And we're still married many years later. But people are just gonna like decide to believe what they're gonna believe, and your book is gonna be read by thousands of people, and I don't know. Like I will say, I don't base things on real life because I find that very difficult then to actually fictionalize because you've had that experience. So then it just becomes bad writing for me. So I don't know. Like
I think you can take a feeling that you had in a certain situation and take that feeling and put it in a new situation with new people and a new, and that's how you can work out your stuff without it being about you.
Right. I think that's right.
But I mean, feelings are universal. So, if you're working out your jealousy, like everybody in here has felt jealous at some point. So, you can pretty much take it in put it in any situation.
Right. Exactly.
You want to sign some books?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.